Professor Catherine Ashford had spent 15 years cataloguing Victorian-era family photographs at the Smithsonian Institution, but when she opened the leather portfolio from the Blackstone estate, her trained eye immediately recognized something that shouldn't exist. The photograph before her showed a formal dinner gathering from 1907, 8 family members arranged around an elaborate table in what appeared to be a wealthy household's dining room. Yet sitting among them, as naturally as if she belonged there, was a child who, according to every document in the estate collection, had never been part of the Blackstone family. The image itself was technically perfect, showing none of the telltale signs of early photographic manipulation that Catherine had been trained to detect. The lighting was consistent across all figures. The shadows fell naturally, and the depth of field suggested a single exposure taken with the large format cameras typical of the period. Every detail spoke to the authenticity of the photograph as an unaltered document of a family gathering that had taken place over a century ago. The child in question appeared to be approximately 7 years old, with dark curls and wearing a white dress with intricate lace trim that matched the formal attire of the other family members. She sat in a small chair that had been positioned between 2 adults, and her hands were folded neatly in her lap in the mannerly pose expected of children during formal photography sessions of the era. Her expression was solemn but alert, and her eyes gazed directly at the camera with the focused attention that early photographers demanded of their subjects. What made the child's presence impossible was the meticulous documentation that accompanied the photograph. The Blackstone family records, compiled by 3 generations of careful genealogists, accounted for every family member present at their 1907 Christmas dinner gathering. The photograph had been taken to commemorate the return of eldest son William from his business travels in Europe, and the guest list had been preserved in multiple family diaries and social correspondence from the period. According to these documents, exactly 7 people had been present at the dinner: Patriarch Jonas Blackstone and his wife Martha, their 3 adult children, William, Catherine, and Robert, and 2 house guests who were Martha's sister Elizabeth and her husband Charles. No mention was made in any contemporary source of a child being present at the gathering, yet there she sat in the photograph, clearly visible and apparently accepted as part of the family group. Catherine began her investigation by examining the provenance of the photograph itself. The image had been discovered in the attic of the Blackstone family home in Newport, Rhode Island, following the death of the last family descendant in 2018. The estate sale had included numerous family artifacts, but this particular photograph had been found separate from the main family collection, stored in a sealed wooden box, along with several items that suggested it had been deliberately hidden away. The accompanying materials included a brief note written in faded ink that read simply, "Emily's last photograph. May God forgive us all." The note was unsigned, but handwriting analysis suggested it had been written by Martha Blackstone, the family matriarch. Most significantly, the note was dated January 15, 1908, nearly 6 weeks after the dinner gathering shown in the photograph. Catherine's search through the Blackstone family papers revealed no reference to anyone named Emily in connection with the family during the relevant time period. The genealogical records were comprehensive, including not only immediate family members, but also servants, frequent guests, and even children who had lived temporarily with the family as wards or adoptees. No Emily appeared in any of these categories. However, Catherine's systematic examination of the family correspondence did reveal subtle references to what appeared to be a family tragedy that had occurred during the winter of 1907-1908. Several letters written by family members in early 1908 contained cryptic references to recent difficulties and the matter we agreed never to discuss. Most tellingly, a letter from Catherine Blackstone to a friend in Boston mentioned that the family had decided to cancel their traditional New Year's celebration due to circumstances that have left us all deeply shaken. These vague references suggested that something significant had occurred shortly after the Christmas dinner shown in the photograph, but the family had apparently made a collective decision to avoid documenting whatever had happened. The absence of specific information in such thoroughly documented family archives was itself suspicious, and suggested that the family had been deliberately concealing something they considered too disturbing to record. Catherine decided to research the background of the photographer who had taken the family portrait. The image bore the embossed stamp of J. Whitman Studios, Newport, a photography business that had operated in the area during the early 1900s. Her investigation into Josiah Whitman's business records revealed that he had been a successful society photographer who specialized in formal family portraits for Newport's wealthy summer residents. However, Catherine also discovered that Whitman's business had closed abruptly in early 1908, just weeks after the Blackstone family photograph was taken. Local newspaper archives contained a brief notice about the closure, stating that Whitman had suddenly departed Newport for health reasons and that his studio equipment had been sold at auction. No forwarding address had been provided, and no subsequent record of Whitman's photography career could be found. The timing of Whitman's departure so closely following the Blackstone photograph session seemed too coincidental to ignore. Catherine began to suspect that whatever family secret the Blackstones had been concealing might be connected to the circumstances under which their family portrait had been taken. Her research took an unexpected turn when she discovered a collection of local newspaper archives that had been digitized by the Newport Historical Society. Searching through issues from late 1907 and early 1908, Catherine found a series of articles that provided crucial context for understanding the mysterious child in the Blackstone photograph. The Newport Mercury had published several reports about the disappearance of 7-year-old Emily Thorne, the daughter of a working-class family who lived in the service district of Newport. According to these articles, Emily had gone missing on December 23, 1907, the same day that the Blackstone family Christmas dinner had taken place. The child had last been seen playing near the harbor area, close to where several wealthy families, including the Blackstones, maintained their seasonal residences. The newspaper coverage of Emily's disappearance revealed that she was known in the community as an unusually intelligent and well-spoken child who had sometimes earned small amounts of money by running errands for the wealthy families in the area. Several articles mentioned that she was particularly skilled at adopting the manners and speech patterns of the upper-class children she encountered, leading some to describe her as having an almost uncanny ability to blend into environments far above her social station. The search for Emily Thorne had continued through the winter months, with local authorities and volunteer groups combing the Newport area for any trace of the missing child. However, by early 1908, the search had been quietly abandoned, and subsequent newspaper coverage suggested that officials had concluded Emily had likely drowned in the harbor, though no body was ever recovered. The connection between Emily Thorne's disappearance and the mysterious child in the Blackstone family photograph seemed obvious, but Catherine struggled to understand how a missing working-class child could have ended up sitting at the table during a formal dinner party with one of Newport's most prominent families. The social barriers of the era made such a scenario virtually impossible under normal circumstances. Catherine's investigation into Emily Thorne's background revealed additional details that deepened the mystery. According to orphanage records from the period, Emily had been placed in the care of the Newport Children's Home following the death of her parents in a tenement fire earlier in 1907. The records described her as an exceptionally bright child who had learned to read and write despite her impoverished background and who showed remarkable adaptability to different social situations. More significantly, the orphanage records indicated that Emily had been known to wander away from the institution, sometimes for days at a time, during which she would apparently find temporary shelter with various families in the area. The staff notes suggested that Emily had an unusual talent for convincing people that she belonged in their households, at least temporarily, and that she had been returned to the orphanage multiple times by families who had initially believed she was a legitimate visitor or relative. This pattern of behavior suggested that Emily might indeed have found her way into the Blackstone household on the night of their Christmas dinner, possibly by convincing the family or their servants that she belonged there. However, this explanation still didn't account for how she had managed to integrate so seamlessly into the formal photograph, or why the family had apparently chosen to conceal her presence in their subsequent documentation. Catherine decided to examine the photograph using advanced digital analysis techniques that could reveal details not visible to the naked eye. High-resolution scanning and specialized software allowed her to examine every aspect of the image at the pixel level, searching for any evidence of manipulation or anomalous elements that might explain the child's impossible presence. The digital analysis confirmed that the photograph showed no signs of composite work or manipulation. However, it did reveal several unusual details that had not been apparent in the original examination. Most significantly, the enhancement showed that the mysterious child's clothing, while appearing to match the formal attire of the other family members, actually consisted of garments that were subtly different in style and quality from those worn by the legitimate family members. The child's white dress, while elegant and well-made, showed construction details that suggested it had been created by a less skilled seamstress than the elaborate gowns worn by the adult women in the photograph. Similarly, her hair ribbons and accessories appeared to be of lower quality materials than those worn by the other family members, despite the overall effect being quite convincing to casual observation. These details suggested that Emily, if indeed she was the mysterious child, had been dressed to blend in with the wealthy family, but that her costume had been hastily assembled from available materials rather than being part of a coordinated wardrobe. This evidence supported the theory that her presence at the dinner had been unplanned and possibly unauthorized. However, the digital analysis also revealed a detail that challenged this interpretation. Enhancement of the area around the child's chair showed that the table setting in front of her included fine china and crystal that perfectly matched the pattern used by the rest of the family. The place setting appeared to have been deliberately arranged for her use, suggesting that her presence at the dinner had been anticipated and prepared for, rather than being a surprise intrusion. This contradiction between the improvised nature of the child's costume and the deliberate preparation of her place setting suggested that the circumstances of her presence were more complex than simple deception or unauthorized entry. Catherine began to suspect that the Blackstone family might have been deliberately involved in bringing Emily to their dinner, despite their subsequent efforts to conceal her presence from the historical record. Catherine's research into the social dynamics of Newport's wealthy families during the early 1900s revealed patterns that might explain how a working-class orphan could have ended up dining with the elite Blackstone family. The Progressive Era had seen the rise of various charitable movements among the wealthy, including programs that brought disadvantaged children into contact with affluent families during holiday seasons. Several Newport families were known to have participated in what were called charity placements, temporary arrangements where orphaned or impoverished children were brought into wealthy households during Christmas and other holidays. These programs were often organized through religious institutions and were intended to provide disadvantaged children with experiences of family life, while allowing wealthy families to fulfill their charitable obligations. However, these charity placements were typically well-documented affairs that were prominently featured in society pages and family correspondence as examples of the participants' social consciousness and religious devotion. The complete absence of any reference to such an arrangement in the Blackstone family papers suggested that Emily's presence, if it had been part of a charitable program, was being treated very differently from the norm. Catherine discovered additional evidence when she found records of similar charity programs in other wealthy New England communities during the same period. These documents revealed that such arrangements sometimes resulted in complicated situations when children formed strong attachments to their temporary families, or when families became emotionally invested in children they were meant to help only temporarily. Several documented cases existed of charity placements that had ended badly when families attempted to formalize adoptions that were not legally possible due to social class differences, or when children refused to return to their original circumstances. In some instances, these situations had led to family scandals that wealthy participants had gone to great lengths to conceal from public knowledge. This background suggested a possible explanation for the mystery surrounding Emily's presence in the Blackstone photograph and the family's subsequent efforts to hide evidence of her connection to them. If Emily had been brought to the family as part of a charity placement that had somehow gone wrong, the Blackstones might have felt compelled to conceal their involvement to avoid scandal or legal complications. Catherine's investigation took a darker turn when she discovered additional information about Emily Thorne's disappearance that had not been included in the initial newspaper coverage. Records from the Newport Police Department, obtained through a historical research request, revealed that investigators had initially suspected foul play in Emily's disappearance, but had been instructed to abandon this line of inquiry by their superiors. The police files contained notes indicating that several officers had wanted to investigate Emily's connections to wealthy families in the area, based on reports that she had been seen in the company of well-dressed adults shortly before her disappearance. However, these investigative efforts had been curtailed after complaints from prominent community members who felt that such inquiries were inappropriate and potentially damaging to innocent families. Most significantly, the police files included a brief note indicating that officers had attempted to interview members of the Blackstone family about Emily's disappearance, but had been refused access by the family's attorney. The note suggested that the Blackstones had claimed no knowledge of the missing child and had cited their social standing as reason why they should not be subjected to questioning in connection with the disappearance of a working-class orphan. This evidence indicated that the police had at least suspected some connection between Emily and the Blackstone family, but that social and political pressures had prevented a thorough investigation. The abandonment of the investigation coincided closely with the apparent decision by Emily's caseworkers to declare her presumed dead, despite the absence of any physical evidence to support this conclusion. Catherine realized that she had uncovered evidence of what appeared to be a deliberate cover-up involving not only the Blackstone family, but also local authorities and possibly other influential community members. The mysterious child in the 1907 photograph was likely Emily Thorne, but her presence at the Blackstone dinner appeared to be connected to circumstances that multiple parties had been motivated to conceal from public knowledge. However, Catherine still lacked a clear understanding of what had actually happened to Emily, or why her association with the Blackstone family had required such extensive concealment efforts. The evidence suggested that she had been present at their Christmas dinner, but it provided no explanation of her ultimate fate or the specific reasons why her connection to the family had been treated as such a dangerous secret. Catherine's breakthrough came when she discovered a cache of private correspondence that had been donated to the Rhode Island Historical Society by a descendant of Elizabeth Crane, Martha Blackstone's sister, who had been present at the 1907 Christmas dinner. These letters, which had never been catalogued or studied by researchers, contained detailed accounts of the events surrounding Emily's presence at the Blackstone household. According to Elizabeth's letters to her close friend in Boston, Emily had indeed been brought to the Blackstone house as part of what Elizabeth described as Martha's charity experiment. Martha had apparently been influenced by progressive era reform movements and had decided to demonstrate her family's social consciousness by inviting a disadvantaged child to share their Christmas celebration. However, Elizabeth's letters revealed that Emily's presence had created complications that none of the adults had anticipated. According to Elizabeth's account, the child had displayed behaviors during the dinner that had disturbed the family and their guests. Most significantly, Emily had apparently demonstrated knowledge of personal family information that she could not possibly have learned through normal means. Elizabeth wrote that Emily had made specific references to family members who had died years earlier, including details about their personalities and private affairs that even some living family members had not known. The child had also accurately described rooms in the Blackstone house that she had never been shown, and had mentioned family financial matters that were closely guarded secrets. Most disturbing was Elizabeth's description of Emily's behavior toward the end of the evening. According to her account, the child had begun speaking in voices that sounded like deceased family members, carrying on conversations with empty chairs as if invisible people were present at the table. The adults had initially dismissed this behavior as childish imagination, but Emily's accuracy in reproducing the speech patterns and personal knowledge of the dead family members had become increasingly unsettling. Elizabeth's letters suggested that the family had begun to suspect that Emily was somehow serving as a conduit for supernatural communication with deceased relatives. While the adults were initially skeptical of such possibilities, the child's uncanny knowledge and behavior had gradually convinced them that something genuinely unusual was occurring. The situation had apparently reached a crisis point when Emily had begun delivering what Elizabeth described as messages from beyond the grave that contained information about family secrets and past events that no living person was supposed to know. These revelations had included details about business improprieties, marital infidelities, and other matters that threatened to destroy the family's reputation if they became public knowledge. According to Elizabeth's account, the family had realized that Emily represented a threat to their social standing and financial security that went far beyond the simple charity case they had intended to help. The child's supernatural abilities, whether genuine or fabricated, had given her access to information that could be used to blackmail or embarrass the family indefinitely. Elizabeth's final letter on the subject, dated January 20th, 1908, contained a cryptic reference to the family's decision to resolve the Emily matter permanently. She wrote that Jonas and Martha had consulted with trusted associates about how to handle the situation, and that they had concluded that drastic measures were necessary to protect the family from ongoing threats. The letter ended with Elizabeth's statement that she had agreed never to discuss the events of Christmas 1907 with anyone, and that she hoped the family's solution would prove effective in preventing future complications. No subsequent letters in the collection made any reference to Emily or the events surrounding her presence at the Blackstone dinner. Catherine found Elizabeth's letters deeply disturbing, as they suggested that the Blackstone family's concealment of Emily's connection to them might have been motivated by something far more sinister than simple social embarrassment. The references to permanent resolution and drastic measures implied that the family might have taken action to ensure that Emily could never reveal what she had learned during her time in their household. The timing of Elizabeth's final letter, coming just 5 days after the brief note about Emily's last photograph that Catherine had found with the original family portrait, suggested that the family's solution to the Emily problem had been implemented in mid-January 1908. This timeline coincided with the abandonment of the police search for the missing child and the conclusion by authorities that she had probably drowned in Newport Harbor. Catherine realized that she might have uncovered evidence of a century-old murder that had been concealed through the combined efforts of a wealthy family and complicit local authorities. The mysterious child in the 1907 photograph was likely the victim of a crime that had been covered up so thoroughly that it had remained hidden for over 100 years. However, Catherine also recognized that the evidence she had gathered was largely circumstantial, and that proving her suspicions would require finding more concrete documentation of what had happened to Emily Thorne. The letters and family papers provided compelling context for understanding the circumstances surrounding Emily's disappearance, but they did not contain explicit confessions or detailed accounts of any criminal activity. Catherine decided to search for additional evidence that might corroborate her theory about Emily's fate. Her investigation led her to examine property records and construction permits from the Blackstone estate during the relevant time period, looking for any indication of excavation or building activity that might have been used to conceal physical evidence. Her search through the Newport Building Department's historical records revealed that the Blackstones had indeed undertaken construction work on their property during the winter of 1907-1908. Permits had been issued for the construction of a new garden gazebo and the installation of extensive landscaping in an area of the estate that had previously been undeveloped. The timing of this construction work, beginning in mid-January 1908 and continuing through the early spring, corresponded closely with the period when Elizabeth's letters suggested the family had been implementing their permanent solution to the Emily problem. The scale of the excavation work required for the gazebo foundation and landscaping would have provided ample opportunity to conceal physical evidence of a crime. Catherine also discovered that the construction work had been performed by workers who were not local to the Newport area, but had been brought in specifically for the Blackstone project. The workers had been housed on the estate during the construction period and had departed immediately upon completion of the work, suggesting that the family had been concerned about maintaining secrecy about the project's details. Most significantly, Catherine found records indicating that the new gazebo had been constructed with an unusually deep foundation that far exceeded what would have been necessary for the structure's architectural requirements. The building permits showed that the excavation had extended nearly 8 feet below ground level, despite the fact that the gazebo itself was a simple wooden structure that would have required minimal foundation support. This evidence suggested that the construction project might have served purposes beyond simple landscaping, and that the excessive excavation could have been used to conceal physical remains or other evidence connected to Emily's disappearance. However, Catherine recognized that proving this theory would require archaeological investigation of the site, which would be legally and practically complicated given the current status of the former Blackstone property. Catherine's research into the current status of the Blackstone estate revealed that the property had been sold to developers following the death of the last family descendant in 2018. The original mansion had been demolished, and the estate grounds were in the process of being subdivided for residential development. However, the area where the 1908 gazebo had been constructed remained undeveloped due to environmental concerns about soil stability. This information presented Catherine with an opportunity to potentially verify her theory about Emily's fate, but it also raised serious ethical and legal questions about how to proceed with her investigation. If her suspicions were correct, the site might contain human remains that represented evidence of a century-old crime. But disturbing the site would require cooperation from multiple agencies and could have significant implications for current property owners and development plans. Catherine decided to consult with law enforcement authorities about her findings, recognizing that the potential evidence of historical criminal activity needed to be handled through proper legal channels. Her meeting with the Newport Police Department's Detective Division revealed that while the statute of limitations had long since expired for most potential crimes, the discovery of human remains would still require official investigation and proper handling. The police department agreed to forward Catherine's research to the Rhode Island State Police's Cold Case Unit, which had protocols for handling historical criminal investigations. However, the authorities also cautioned Catherine that proving criminal activity from over a century ago would be extremely difficult, even with archaeological evidence, due to the degradation of physical evidence and the absence of living witnesses. Most significantly, the police warned Catherine that publicizing her theories without concrete proof could have serious legal consequences, including potential defamation claims from surviving family members or property owners. They advised her to limit her public statements about the case until official investigation could either confirm or refute her suspicions about Emily's fate. Catherine found herself in a frustrating position where she possessed compelling evidence of what appeared to be a historical injustice, but was constrained by legal and ethical considerations from pursuing the investigation to its logical conclusion. The mysterious child in the 1907 photograph had led her to uncover what might be evidence of a century-old murder, but proving her theory would require resources and authority that exceeded what was available to an academic researcher. However, Catherine's investigation had at least succeeded in recovering Emily Thorne's identity and documenting her connection to the Blackstone family, ensuring that the forgotten child would no longer be simply a mystery figure in a historical photograph. Even if the full truth about Emily's fate remained elusive, her story had been restored to the historical record, and her memory had been preserved for future generations. Catherine prepared a comprehensive report on her findings for submission to the academic journals that specialized in historical criminal investigations and social justice research. While the report acknowledged the limitations of the available evidence, it presented a compelling case for re-examining assumptions about crime and cover-ups among America's wealthy elite during the early 20th century. The report also highlighted the importance of looking beyond official historical narratives to uncover the experiences of marginalized individuals whose stories had been deliberately suppressed or forgotten. Emily Thorne's brief appearance in the Blackstone family photograph represented not only a historical mystery, but also a reminder of how easily the powerless could disappear from the historical record when their presence became inconvenient to the powerful. Catherine's investigation into the 1907 dinner photograph had revealed far more than she had initially expected to discover. What had begun as curiosity about an anomalous detail in a family portrait had evolved into an exploration of class conflict, supernatural belief, and criminal conspiracy in America's Gilded Age society. The case demonstrated that historical photographs could serve as windows into aspects of the past that had been deliberately concealed or forgotten, and that careful analysis of visual evidence could reveal stories that had been erased from written records. Emily Thorne's presence in the Blackstone family portrait had preserved evidence of events that the perpetrators had believed would remain hidden forever. However, Catherine's experience also illustrated the limitations faced by historical researchers when investigating powerful individuals and institutions that had extensive resources for concealing their activities. The Blackstone family's success in hiding Emily's story for over a century demonstrated how effectively wealth and social position could be used to manipulate official narratives and suppress inconvenient truths. The mysterious child at the Blackstone dinner table had finally been identified as 7-year-old Emily Thorne, a working-class orphan whose supernatural abilities had made her both valuable and dangerous to the wealthy family that had temporarily taken her in. While the full details of her fate might never be known with certainty, her story served as a powerful reminder of the hidden victims whose experiences had been erased from America's historical consciousness. Catherine's research had restored Emily's identity and documented her connection to one of Newport's most prominent families, ensuring that her brief life would not be completely forgotten. The 1907 photograph that had preserved Emily's image for over a century continued to serve as evidence of her existence and as a testament to the complex and often tragic relationships between America's social classes during the nation's Gilded Age. The case remained open in Catherine's mind, with many questions still unanswered and much evidence still waiting to be discovered. However, her investigation had succeeded in transforming Emily Thorne from an anonymous mystery into a real person whose story illuminated important aspects of American social history that had been hidden from public view for far too long. Emily's presence in the Blackstone family photograph would continue to challenge viewers to look beyond the surface appearance of historical images and to consider what stories might be hidden beneath the carefully composed facades that wealthy families had presented to the world. Her story served as a reminder that history's most important truths were often found not in official records, but in the anomalies and contradictions that careful observers could detect in seemingly ordinary artifacts from the past. However, Catherine's investigation was far from over. 6 months after submitting her initial report, she received an unexpected contact that would transform her understanding of the Emily Thorne case and reveal connections that extended far beyond the Blackstone family's involvement in the mysterious child's disappearance. The contact came from Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a retired psychiatrist from Boston who had spent decades studying what she described as historical trauma patterns in New England families. Dr. Whitfield had read Catherine's preliminary research findings and believed she possessed information that would significantly expand the scope of the investigation. According to Dr. Whitfield, her clinical work had brought her into contact with multiple families throughout New England who reported similar patterns of supernatural manifestations connected to children who had disappeared during the early 1900s. These cases shared remarkable similarities with the Emily Thorne situation, including the involvement of wealthy families, the presence of children with apparent psychic abilities, and subsequent cover-ups that had successfully concealed the truth for decades. Dr. Whitfield had been documenting these cases for over 30 years, initially as part of her research into inherited psychological trauma, but gradually recognizing that the patterns she was observing suggested something far more systematic and disturbing than isolated incidents of family dysfunction. Her files contained evidence of what appeared to be a network of wealthy families who had been involved in similar situations with psychically gifted children during the Progressive era. The psychiatrist's research had identified at least 12 families across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut who appeared to have encountered children with supernatural abilities between 1905 and 1915. In each case, the families had initially welcomed these children into their households, apparently believing that the children's psychic gifts could be beneficial or entertaining. However, the relationships had invariably soured when the children began revealing uncomfortable truths about family secrets or displaying abilities that the adults found threatening rather than amusing. Most significantly, Dr. Whitfield's investigation had revealed that many of these cases were connected through what appeared to be a loose network of wealthy individuals who shared information about children with psychic abilities and who sometimes recommended such children to each other for various purposes. The network seemed to have included spiritualists, social reformers, and wealthy dilettantes who were interested in exploring supernatural phenomena during an era when such interests were fashionable among the elite. Catherine realized that Emily Thorne's connection to the Blackstone family might have been part of a much larger pattern of exploitation and abuse that had targeted vulnerable children throughout New England during the early 1900s. The individual tragedy she had been investigating was apparently one example of a systematic practice that had affected dozens of children and families over the course of a decade. Dr. Whitfield's files contained detailed case histories that provided disturbing parallels to the Emily Thorne situation. Several families had reported hosting children who demonstrated uncanny knowledge of deceased relatives, who could accurately predict future events, and who seemed to serve as conduits for supernatural communication. However, these gifts had consistently proven to be double-edged, as the children also revealed embarrassing family secrets and sometimes made demands or threats that the adults found intolerable. The patterns described in Dr. Whitfield's research suggested that wealthy families had developed informal methods for dealing with psychically gifted children who became problematic. These methods apparently ranged from simple abandonment to more drastic measures that ensured the children could never reveal what they had learned during their time in elite households. Catherine found Dr. Whitfield's research both fascinating and deeply disturbing. The evidence suggested that Emily Thorne had been a victim not of an isolated family crisis, but of a systematic pattern of exploitation that had targeted vulnerable children with supernatural abilities. The Blackstone family's actions appeared to be part of a broader network of wealthy individuals who had been using and discarding psychically gifted children for their own purposes. However, Catherine also recognized that Dr. Whitfield's research raised complex questions about the nature of the psychic abilities that these children had supposedly possessed. While the evidence for systematic exploitation was compelling, the supernatural elements of the cases remained difficult to verify or explain through conventional frameworks of historical analysis. Catherine decided to investigate Dr. Whitfield's claims by examining some of the other cases that had been identified through the psychiatrist's research. Her investigation into the disappearance of 10-year-old Thomas Ashworth in Hartford, Connecticut, revealed patterns that closely paralleled the Emily Thorne case. Thomas had disappeared in 1909 after spending several weeks as a guest in the home of the prominent Ashworth family, who claimed he was a distant relative visiting for the summer. However, Catherine's research revealed that no such relationship existed, and that Thomas had actually been an orphan from a local institution who had somehow gained access to the wealthy household. Family letters discovered in the Ashworth estate described Thomas as possessing remarkable abilities to communicate with deceased family members and to provide accurate information about events that had occurred before his birth. However, the family's initial fascination with Thomas's gifts had turned to fear when he began revealing details about financial improprieties and personal scandals that threatened the family's reputation. The Ashworth family papers contained references to consultations with trusted associates about how to handle the Thomas situation, using language that closely paralleled the references Catherine had found in Elizabeth Crane's letters about the Blackstone family's approach to the Emily problem. The timing of Thomas's disappearance coincided with construction work on the Ashworth estate that involved extensive excavation for a new carriage house. Catherine found similar patterns in several other cases from Dr. Whitfield's files. Children with apparent psychic abilities had been brought into wealthy households, had initially been welcomed for their supernatural gifts, but had subsequently disappeared under circumstances that suggested deliberate elimination rather than accidental death or voluntary departure. The consistency of these patterns across multiple families and geographic locations convinced Catherine that she had uncovered evidence of what amounted to a systematic campaign of exploitation and murder targeting vulnerable children during the early 1900s. The wealth and social position of the perpetrators had allowed them to conceal their crimes effectively and to avoid any official investigation or accountability. However, Catherine also realized that proving these crimes would be extremely difficult, given the passage of time and the thoroughness of the original cover-ups. The families involved had possessed the resources and connections necessary to manipulate official investigations and to ensure that evidence of their activities was either destroyed or concealed beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. Catherine's investigation took another unexpected turn when Dr. Whitfield introduced her to Sarah Chen, a genealogist who had been researching her own family's connection to one of the cases from the early 1900s. Sarah's great-great-grandfather had been a servant in the household of a wealthy Boston family who had hosted a psychically gifted child named Rebecca Morrison in 1906. According to family oral history that had been passed down through Sarah's family, her ancestor had witnessed the systematic abuse and eventual murder of Rebecca Morrison by her wealthy hosts. The servant had been too frightened to report what he had seen to authorities, but he had documented the events in a private journal that had been preserved by subsequent generations of the family. Sarah's ancestor had described Rebecca as a remarkably intelligent 11-year-old girl who could accurately predict future events and who claimed to receive messages from deceased family members. The wealthy family had initially treated Rebecca as an entertaining curiosity, but their attitude had changed when she began revealing uncomfortable truths about their business practices and personal relationships. The journal described how the family had gradually become more controlling and threatening toward Rebecca, confining her to the house and forbidding her to speak with anyone outside the household. When Rebecca had threatened to expose the family's secrets unless they allowed her to leave, they had decided that more permanent measures were necessary to ensure her silence. The servant's journal provided a detailed account of Rebecca's murder, describing how the family had poisoned the child and had subsequently buried her body in the basement of their Boston mansion. The journal also revealed that the family had consulted with other wealthy individuals about how to handle the situation, suggesting that they were part of a network that shared information about dealing with problematic psychic children. Most significantly, the journal identified several of the families that had been involved in similar situations, including names that matched cases from Dr. Whitfield's research and families that Catherine had encountered in her investigation of the Emily Thorne case. The evidence suggested that the network of wealthy individuals involved in exploiting psychic children was more extensive and organized than Catherine had initially realized. Sarah Chen's family had preserved not only the servant's journal, but also several photographs that he had secretly taken of Rebecca Morrison during her time in the Boston household. These images showed a young girl who bore a remarkable resemblance to Emily Thorne, both in physical appearance and in the distinctive intensity of expression that Catherine had noted in the Blackstone family photograph. The photographs also provided visual evidence of Rebecca's deteriorating condition during her final weeks in the wealthy household. Early images showed a healthy, alert child, but later photographs revealed signs of malnutrition and psychological trauma that suggested systematic abuse. The final photograph in the series showed Rebecca confined to what appeared to be a cellar room, her expression reflecting the desperation of a child who realized she was trapped in a situation from which there was no escape. Catherine found these photographs deeply disturbing, but they also provided crucial evidence for understanding the systematic nature of the exploitation that psychic children had faced during the early 1900s. The images documented not only the physical abuse that children like Rebecca and Emily had endured, but also the calculated nature of their treatment by adults who had viewed them as disposable resources rather than human beings deserving of protection. The collaboration between Catherine, Dr. Whitfield and Sarah Chen had revealed evidence of what appeared to be an extensive network of wealthy families throughout New England who had systematically exploited and murdered psychically gifted children during the Progressive Era. The scale of the crime suggested that dozens of children had been victimized over the course of a decade, with the perpetrators using their wealth and social position to avoid any accountability for their actions. However, the three women also recognized that their investigation had reached a point where academic research needed to give way to official law enforcement action. The evidence they had gathered suggested the existence of multiple crime scenes and burial sites that might still contain physical evidence of the historical murders they had documented. Catherine contacted the FBI's art crime team, which had protocols for handling historical criminal investigations that involved significant cultural or archaeological elements. The federal agents who reviewed their research acknowledged that while the crimes themselves were beyond prosecution due to the passage of time, the discovery of burial sites and physical evidence would require official investigation and proper handling. The FBI's involvement brought resources and authority that Catherine had lacked as an individual researcher, But it also meant that further investigation would be conducted through official channels that might limit public access to the findings. The agents cautioned Catherine that some of the families implicated in their research remained wealthy and powerful, with legal resources that could complicate any attempt to publicize unproven allegations about their ancestors. Despite these constraints, Catherine was satisfied that her investigation had succeeded in documenting a previously unknown chapter of American history that illustrated important truths about the relationship between wealth, power, and justice during the nation's Gilded Age. The mysterious child in the 1907 Blackstone family photograph had led to the discovery of systematic crimes that had been concealed for over a century. Emily Thorne's story had been transformed from an isolated mystery into evidence of a broader pattern of exploitation and abuse that had affected vulnerable children throughout New England during the early 1900s. Her presence in the Blackstone family photograph served as a testament to the experiences of dozens of other children whose stories had been completely erased from the historical record. Catherine's investigation had demonstrated that historical photographs could serve as crucial evidence for uncovering crimes that had been deliberately concealed by powerful perpetrators. The careful analysis of visual documents, combined with systematic research into family papers and official records, had revealed truths that the original conspirators had believed would remain hidden forever. The case also illustrated the importance of preserving and investigating family oral histories and private documents that might contain information about historical injustices that had been excluded from official narratives. Sarah Chen's family's preservation of her ancestors' journal had provided crucial evidence that would otherwise have been lost, demonstrating how marginalized communities sometimes served as the only repositories for inconvenient truths about the powerful. However, Catherine's experience also highlighted the limitations faced by historical researchers when investigating crimes committed by wealthy and powerful individuals. Despite compelling evidence of systematic murder and cover-up, the passage of time and the thoroughness of the original concealment efforts meant that complete justice for the victims remained elusive. The network of wealthy families who had exploited psychic children during the early 1900s had successfully used their resources to avoid accountability during their lifetimes, and their descendants continued to benefit from the concealment of these historical crimes. The children who had been victimized remained largely forgotten, their stories known only through fragments of evidence that careful researchers could piece together from scattered sources. Catherine's final report on the expanded investigation documented the systematic nature of the crimes and identified specific families and locations that warranted further investigation by law enforcement authorities. However, she also acknowledged that the complete scope of the exploitation network might never be fully understood, given the effectiveness of the original cover-up efforts and the passage of over a century since the crimes were committed. The mysterious child at the Blackstone dinner table had become a symbol of all the forgotten victims whose stories had been deliberately erased from America's historical consciousness. Emily Thorne's brief appearance in a family photograph had preserved evidence of crimes that powerful perpetrators had believed would remain hidden forever, serving as a reminder that visual documents could sometimes reveal truths that written records had been manipulated to conceal. Catherine's investigation had restored the identities and stories of multiple victims while documenting the systematic nature of their exploitation and murder. The 1907 photograph that had initiated the investigation continued to serve as evidence of historical injustices that demanded recognition and remembrance, even when complete justice remained impossible to achieve. The case had profound implications for how historians approach the study of wealthy families and elite institutions during America's Gilded Age, highlighting the need to look beyond official narratives and carefully composed public images to uncover the darker realities that had often been concealed beneath surfaces of respectability and social prominence. Emily Thorne and the other victims of the psychic children exploitation network had finally been recognized as real people whose lives had been deliberately taken by those who should have protected them. Their stories served as a permanent reminder of the vulnerability of marginalized individuals when they encountered systems of power that valued privilege and reputation above human life and dignity. Catherine's work had ensured that these forgotten victims would not remain completely lost to history, and that their experiences would continue to inform understanding of the complex relationships between wealth, power, and justice in American society. The mysterious child in the 1907 photograph had led to the recovery of multiple lost stories, creating a lasting monument to the memory of children whose voices had been silenced, but whose presence in historical documents had preserved evidence of both their existence and the crimes committed against them.